Hello and welcome to the Jacksonville Jaguars Insider Podcast. My name is John Shipley. I'm your host and beat reporter, and I've been your beat reporter covering the Jacksonville Jaguars for On SI every single day since August 2019, and we are continuing to move forward to another offseason together. As always, you can always find our 100% free 24/7 boots on the ground coverage of the Jacksonville Jaguars every day when you follow us on social media such as Facebook and Twitter at Jaguars on SI. You can also find us at www.si.com/NFL/Jaguars. Hello and welcome to today's episode. Today we are going to talk about 2025 NFL offseason grades from ESPN and how the Jaguars shook out. Now, just right off the bat, ESPN gave the Jaguars a C grade. In terms of teams with C grades, it appears, obviously not too many. The Jaguars were on the lower end of the spectrum. It was the Washington Commanders also got a C grade. The Pittsburgh Steelers got a C grade. Carolina Panthers got a C grade. The Dallas Cowboys got a C grade. And then below them was the Atlanta Falcons with a C minus and the New Orleans Saints with a D. So they were in the bottom 7 to 8 of ESPN offseason grades. I'm not surprised by that, and I'm not saying that because I believe the Jaguars had a poor offseason. I am not of the belief that the Jaguars had a poor offseason. One aspect that seems like is never really included in these grades is changes that's made to the franchise. So to me, these grades are always looking more at, offseason moves in terms of free agents, draft picks, trades. To me, the Jaguars' offseason should be higher than the C alone because of the changes made at head coach and general manager. I think that general manager Trent Baalke obviously did some good things. While here, he set up the team well in some aspects. Brian Thomas Jr. was obviously a fantastic pick. He helped make sure the Jaguars didn't really have to worry about any big contracts with this new regime because guys like Tyson Campbell, Trevor Lawrence, and Josh Hines Allen were already, under the books, under contract. And then going from him to James Gladstone, though, it just feels as if the Jaguars took a step into the modern age of the NFL. And to Trent Baalke's credit, I do think he tried to evolve some as a GM. I think he tried to get into the analytics of draft trades and all that, and I think that Trent was not anti-analytics whatsoever. And in fact, I know for a fact Trent was very pro-analytics, and they, obviously had it as a part of their decision-making process. It wasn't the decision-making process, but it was still part of it. But I think the biggest reason why going from Trent Baalke to James Gladstone is an upgrade for the Jaguars and should be considered into this grade is because Gladstone has just proven, he'll be, in my opinion, more bold, more aggressive. To me, he has more of what I'd say a cohesive plan. A lot of times Baalke would make moves, and I was just, it looked like it was making moves at times for the sake of making moves. I can't say I always saw a full year-to-year long-term plan. It kind of seemed like they were kind of just picking it up as they went along. And beside that, obviously going from ex-head coach Doug Peterson, who does have a Super Bowl ring to his credit, did technically have 2 winning seasons in his 3 years with the Jaguars, and did take the Jaguars to the playoffs in 2022. But he was also the coach of a team who just completely crumbled. They start off 8-3 in 2023. In the year 9-8, completely limped to the finish. And then 2024, everything was just a disaster. And it started well before week 1 started. It started, in my opinion, in the offseason, when it was clear that him and Trent Baalke were nowhere near on the same page. Whether that came, in my opinion, to who was calling plays for the offense, whether that came to how the Jaguars were utilizing the players from the 2023 draft class, with Trent Baalke openly saying that the team needed to get better at, deploying their rookies and ramping up their development. And then you add on just the fact that it seems like Doug Peterson kind of lost his grip on the rope a little bit with the Jaguars. Injuries stacked up. There were a ton of scheme questions, both offensively and defensively. And it just seemed like he wasn't the Doug Peterson of old. So you go from Doug Peterson to Liam Cohen, who, has only been an NFL offense coordinator for 2 years in his coaching career, but last year in Tampa Bay significantly improved their offense. And he significantly improved it compared to a guy who got a head coaching job the year before. So I think ultimately Liam Cohen has a lot to like as an innovator and a play caller and a schemer. Much more so, I think, than what the issues the Jaguars ran into with Doug Peterson, namely the play calling issue. I don't think it was any secret that pretty much everybody else involved with the franchise wanted Doug Peterson to call plays last year, but he didn't. And it was one of the things that ultimately did him in. So now you're going to a guy who does want to call plays, who will call plays, who likes calling plays, in obviously Liam Cohen. So I think that needs to be factored in here. And I think what also needs to be factored into here is the fact that due to those changes at head coach and general manager, and even though we haven't seen Liam Cohen coach a game yet, and even though we haven't seen a James Gladstone-built team take the field yet, I think the Jaguars have fixed their biggest problem even without those things. There's now synergy. There's cohesiveness when it comes to the leadership of the team's football operations. They haven't had that, I'd say, in pretty much the entire time that I've covered this team. And I've covered them since August 2019. Dave Caldwell and Doug Marrone seem to like each other. But the Coughlin thing in 2019 was obviously all over the place. I didn't get the sense that Marrone especially was a big fan of that setup. In 2021, you had Urban Meyer and Trent Baalke. I mean, who remembers the Chris Doyle fiasco? Who remembers when they had to re-put the Chris Doyle statement out and attach a name to it? That was one of the most bizarre things I've seen a franchise do. That was simply the Jaguars saying, we're not on the same page whatsoever. We are on two very, very different wavelengths. And things did not get any better from there. Any better whatsoever. And even in future years, even after Urban was gone. And I'm not going to say Trent Baalke was wrong for clashing with Urban or for not thinking he knew what he was doing. He wasn't wrong. Urban didn't know what he was doing whatsoever. But that they were still a part of that toxic, combative environment. And then you move forward. Trent Baalke stays on as a general manager. The worry for so many people was, can you really start anew if you're keeping the general manager in place? Because then it's essentially a forced marriage. And that's what it felt like Doug Peterson and Trent Baalke became, a partnership of convenience. Trent Baalke needed somebody who would work with him, and Doug Peterson needed a team that would give him another chance to be a head coach, because it didn't seem like many teams were knocking on his door. So they were the right people for each other at the right time in terms of what each of them needed from the other side. But it was very clear as time would go on that the lack of synergy between the two and the lack of cohesiveness, and I know they tried time and time again to say they had a great relationship, etc. It was very clear that they saw so many things in so many different ways. So that's what I think the ESPN grade got wrong about the Jaguars. Not anything to do with their evaluations on the players, and because I get those. I get thinking De'Ami Brown is a risky bet. I get thinking that they paid a lot for Travis Hunter. But what I don't get is factoring in that they now seemingly have a head coach and general manager who are talented, who are young, and who actually seem to not hate each other, which I think is a very big step in the right direction. Thank you guys for listening to today's episode of the Jacksonville Jaguars Insider Podcast. My name is John Shipley. Please give us a like, follow, subscription, whatever you got to do, and we'll be back next time.